Hello everyone, I'm Ben, and I've once paid 11 credits to break a Titanium with NT. Oh, a glorious
Uh,
moment there. And this is my co-host, Sanjay. Hi Sanjay.
Hi. I've been twice flatlined by Pup, and I've been multiple times, more times than I have counted, been flatlined by Yagura.
Oh, what an honorable way to flatline. Anyway, we are both going to do some matrix analyzing today. So this is a stats panel, shall we say? Kind of reminiscent of how sports analysts do their data crunching after a series of matches or something. So imagine that we are sitting behind a table complete with backlights, a professional um, screen in the background showing all the fixtures and everything. We don't have the budget for that, but just imagine that we are doing that sort of professional thing. So today we'll be crunching numbers about on Euros 2018. Data kindly provided by the ever wonderful Jono, who has created the tournament software Cobra.ai. Because of that, we actually have full access to every single identity played by every player from rank number 1 to 244. There were uh, more than 240 players participating, one of the biggest tournaments ever.
Yeah, bigger than Worlds last year.
Was it? How big was Worlds last year?
234, I think.
Nice. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, we have a lot of numbers to go through. We are just going to rapid fire a bunch of statistics. So without further ado, let's begin. Starting with runner identity breakdown. So, Sanjay, what do we have here?
So we have a lot of Valencia and a lot of Max. Over, I think, 42% of the cut is Val and Max. 30% of the cut is Valencia. Or, sorry, of Swiss. Um, that's huge.
Yeah,
Um,
so the stats goes 75 players were on Valencia of the 244, making up 30%, more than 30% of the entire Swiss field, and as such is the first most represented runner in the entire field. And in the cut, it was a top 16 cut. We know that 5 of the 16 players are on Valencia, which is kind of similar in terms of percentage representation, roughly 30% also on Valencia. And the best placing Val player, Chris Dyer, is currently King of Swiss. So he's the best placing Valencia is ranked number 1. And Delta is simply the difference in Swiss percentage versus cut percentage.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty easy to say that anytime you see any difference between the Swiss percentage and the cut percentage, it is very important. And it means if it's positive, it means the ID is very good, and if it's negative, it means the ID is trash.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting way to see what the general public thinks of an ID versus what the pros think of an ID. So I think one really good example is 419. 419, only 11 people of the original field brought 219, but it was pretty highly represented in the top card comparatively, with of the 16 people sporting 419. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think sincerely, when you have smaller ID representation, the stats are going to be less useful. Certainly, there was actually some pretty impressive Adam placements, but Adam didn't make the cut, so had zero cut representation, and you could say that that doesn't specifically represent the strength of Adam. Whereas with Val, it's practically the law of large numbers here, where it's proof positive that if you that Val's going to get 31% of the cut.
Yeah, that's a very interesting statistic to highlight. 16 people brought Adam. None of them made it to the top cut. The closest, the best placer finished 23rd. So, very interesting. I thought Adam might actually have a decent shot at making top 16 this time, given the number of players on it, but apparently not.
Yeah, I
And
suppose 23 is pretty close to 16.
yeah, other interesting stats. The more players brought Adam than any other criminal identity. Seems like criminal is not getting much love. Whether it's 419 or Geist, there were still more Adam players than either of those.
Yeah, and as I think also while we're highlighting things, my favorite stat for any tournament is the singletons,
Yep.
and we have five of them on the runner side. Uh, of course, Exile, Alice, who we'll talk
Alice.
later about. She was actually very well represented at Worlds and has had a big drop off. Um, dear to my heart, Jasminder Serene. Only one Steve and only one Ken.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, all these singletons and a lot of double turns. Only two players brought Ayla and Kretzo as well. So, some identities that didn't get much love. Speaking of not much love, Apex zero, completely.
The only faction not to show up at Euros.
So much for consume and what's the other card? No one remembers.
Oh, a simulator.
Ah, yeah, a simulator, of course.
Uh, they've only they've only heightened the gap between Apocalypse Apex and Install a Million Cards Apex, and oh, it's so hard to build.
Yeah, I know. Looks like none of the 244 players managed to come up with a coherent Apex build, good enough to justify bringing to Euros at least.
Yeah,
Well,
which does mean Apex was the only undefeated faction at Euros.
thonk. Well, I guess we'll have to wait for next Euros to give out those sweet Apex click trackers. In the meantime, let's hop over to the pie charts. These
Yeah,
are for the respective major factions, the breakdown between identities within each major faction. So I think we can see that there's a very good split between, or rather a good spread between the IDs for Shaper and Criminal. Anarch not so much. Valencia took away more than half of the Anarch player base. It seems like it's too good to not play. Whereas
yeah.
Criminal is pretty split evenly between 419 guys and the rest. Same thing for Shaper, split between Smoke, Haley, and the rest.
Yeah, I think it's probably just a function of there not being as many criminal players that you don't really get the multivaried. So even though I think Val is dominating Anarch, you get there's a lot of slices to this pie, and same in Shaper that people are excited about a lot of different options. But in Criminal, you're not seeing any, I guess, Silhouette, no Gabe. Um, I don't think you would see Nero, but just it's a sparser
Yep.
amount of slices in this pie.
Yep,
Sad to
that's a
see.
very good observation. Yeah, of the three runner factions, Criminal has the sparsest pie, while Shaper actually has the most identities represented. They are only missing one of their identities
Oh
from the
no,
pie
our
chart.
dear friend,
Oh
our
no.
lunar
Yeah.
boy.
Poor professor. No love for the professor.
Oh, well, there's also our dear friend who probably ran into a pop-up window on the way to Euros
Oh
and couldn't get here.
no, Nasir! I forgot all about you. Yeah.
Most people do.
Yep. So I guess, two identities that didn't make the cut, shall we say? All right. Let's take a look at runner factions here. Second tab, we have collated the number of each major faction. In the Swiss, we see that Anarch dominated. More than 50% of players chose to play Anarch. Solid, roughly quarter of players went for Shaper, and the rest are just there for show. But interestingly, in the cut, the percentage of criminal players actually went up, and Anarch went down. This is quite an interesting statistic.
Yeah, it looks like there's, and this was criminals sort of took all that pieces of the pie that the mini facts were in, sliced a little bit into Anarch. I guess Anarch stayed pretty similar. Um,
Actually, yeah, it did.
yeah.
Mm.
Really, criminals are just eating up those global sec and rogue bioroid runners.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, so surprisingly, very similar pies, especially for Shaper and Anarch, between Swiss and Top Cut.
Yeah, and remind me what criminal IDs made the cut. Do we have? Are we going to
So
be looking at? Yeah. Okay.
so two 419s, I believe.
Nice. Oh, and a Geist.
And a Geist, yes.
Nice, nice, nice.
Right, so with that, let's move on to the corp ID, shall we? The third tab
Yes,
here.
let's.
Yep. So same thing for the corp side. Surprisingly, actually, for once, Wayland is finally on top. Most played
Yeah,
faction, Titan and Scorpios both outnumbering the rest of the field.
what huge representation here.
Indeed.
Uh, and I suppose also want and a lot of little singletons here. Very, very happy to see all the little corp diversity down at the bottom of this chart.
I think
We have,
what's really interesting is that some of these scarcely represented corps actually have representation in the cut as well. Near Hub played by 3 people, one of them made the cut. Jemison played by 4 people, another one made the cut, and finally the only Blue Sun player managed to sneak into the cut as well.
yeah, that's a wonderful point. It's exciting because I think oftentimes if you're the only person playing your deck, it means you probably made the mistake, or you're just interested in you have different priorities than other people. And as a person who's played a lot of singletons in cuts or in Swiss, I can relate with that. But if you make the cut, it means that you were right and everyone else was wrong.
Yeah, so for a tournament of this scale, it's basically the biggest tournament since Worlds. You expect that the meta is pretty, or rather, the competitive side of the meta is pretty saturated with the same players playing the same decks, the best decks. But clearly, it's not the case here. We see that there's a wide variety of corps that made the cut. No corp was represented more than 3 times, no single identity rather, and lots of singletons as well. So a very diverse top card field, which we'll touch on more a bit later.
Yeah, and I think it kind of speaks to I know personally, corp deck building is kind of exciting right now because it feels very wide open.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at the delta, some very much bigger swings for the corp side than the runner. Titan, which was the most represented corp in Swiss, only one made it to the top card. Surprisingly, I wonder if they will emerge victorious. On the flip side, Cerebral Imaging, probably one of those high skill decks that not a lot of people are drawn to, was overrepresented in the top card. 3 of the 16 made it to the top card, so a very high delta value right there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, and of course, 100% of the Blue Sun players.
yeah, that's an amazing statistic. Blue Sun, repping Blue Sun there. Yeah, he even appeared on stream, so that's something to check out. That Blue Sun.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're up to.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so moving on to the pie charts. Same thing here. Look at that. Ooh, I should change this. This is ambient, but look at that ambient pie chart. Man, that speaks volumes.
It's so sparse.
This is by far the sparsest of any of the main factions. There are only 3 ambient identities represented at all.
There's only 2 more than GlobalSec.
Yeah, so basically it's Asmari, CTM, and a small slice for Near Earth Hub. All the Data and Destiny identities, your New Angela Sol, your Sync, all those have completely dropped off the map, which is relatively astonishing. We'll talk more about that later when we dissect the individual packs, but my gosh.
Yeah, and there's some of those IDs I quite like.
Yeah.
On the other hand, look at these beautiful Wayland and Jinteki pieces of pie.
Yeah, very well represented. There's only one Wayland ID that wasn't actually represented. It took me quite a while to actually figure that out, but it turns out that core Wayland received no love at all. That's crazy.
Yeah, thematically it's not as big of a deal because I think Builder of Nations is just core Wayland with a different sort of philosophy.
Yeah, but money
just catch them on a bad day.
Yeah, money is never a bad thing though. I would happily play core Wayland over a lot of these IDs, but well, looks like the public is going against the grain here. Same thing with Jinteki. No Harmony MedTech, no Nisei Division, but that's about it.
Yeah.
And HB having lost ETF to rotation, now CI is now the dominant HB identity. The others don't seem powerful enough to justify playing, so a lot of stuff, especially the newer identities like Seda, uh, Architects of Tomorrow, very low representation here.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the sort of 50-50 split between CI and not CI here.
Yeah, it's almost as if this is the CI faction.
Yeah.
Right. Speaking
All
of
right.
factions, let's move on to the next tab. Same thing here. We see that Wayland has dominated both the Swiss and the top cut, taking out a nice 44% chunk of the field of players. HB and NBN kind of gain from Swiss to cut, eating away at the Jinteki slice, which has massively narrowed from 23% to
Yeah.
6%. So, yeah. I'm not too surprised by this. I think Jinteki is very popular with the less competitive players. Like when I first started playing, the core set ID that most spoke out to me as on the corp side was Jinteki PE. You see net damage, you see the traps, the ambushes. That's the sort of gameplay that a lot of people enjoy. But at the top tier, it seems like people are gravitating towards the more consistent decks apparently.
Yeah, and I think also looking at the Jinteki ID breakdown, it didn't seem really like there was a consensus on a best Jinteki deck. There's some Pilana, there's some PE, there's some Ag Infusion. So unlike other factions, which I think had some well-established maybe things they were doing, I don't know how much Jinteki settled on a thing. It would be interesting to see what the Pilana deck that made the cut looks like.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. Lots of P and Ag Infusion in the field, but none made the top cut. And of all the Pilana, the most represented Jinteki, only one in the cut.
Yeah, yeah.
So some very interesting stats there. Yep. I guess that's all for
And
stats. Yep, go on.
Yeah, the HB representation in the cut is all CI, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Now let's move on to comparison with this year's Euros versus last year's Worlds. So take this away, Sanjay. You got this.
Okay, yeah. So we did some breakdown between the representation in the Swiss at Worlds, where I think Red Sands had not yet come out. Is that right? No, that's not right. No, Kitara had not yet come out.
Yes, correct. Yep, because that was revised core set. Yep.
Yeah, we just had revised core set. Red Sands had finished, and we were all excited to see what the decks would start looking at like. And we ended up on the corp side having a lot of CI, some PU, some Ag Infusion, and some what was it, CTM? Yeah, in the cut, and just a lot of CI, a lot of Titan versus Euros, where we have just a huge amount of Scorpios and Titan, and so we have here the sort of big jumps with when you add Katara cycle and have a little bit more time to build decks, and the biggest drop-offs. So a lot more Scorpios. Look at all these Wayland IDs that just got more popular.
Yeah. Yep, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, all the Wayland IDs floating to the top there. And we also see a bunch of Jintekis floating up. Some very notable drops like, as you mentioned, CI, also Ag Infusion, PU, all those, and CTM, especially CTM. All these very well represented at Worlds, not so much at Euros.
Yeah, and I think I think certainly in terms of sort of talking to people before this tournament, all these IDs, Scorpios, Argus, Titan, maybe not Jemison, but they would all be considered valid things to do. Whereas I think at Worlds, you bring an Argus deck and somebody would say, "Whoa, look at this fancy person here." I think same with Scorpios. I think Titan was sort of a thing people were trying out, but it didn't really. It wasn't. I guess the smart money wasn't on Titan.
Yeah.
I think conversely, as far as Gagarin or as far as Wayland factions go, I think Gagarin was sort of a boogeyman at Worlds, and I think the threat is people have sort of given up on going into deep space.
Indeed, yeah. The most wanted list has hammered deep space exploration pretty hard. So the way to interpret this data is, I should have said this earlier, but 100% is the baseline. 100% means that the same percentage of players brought the decks in Worlds as compared to Euros. So as we can see, those from Polana Foods and above, those were the corps that gain. So we see it's mostly just Wayland and Jinteki with the sole outlier of Next Design. Who plays Next Design? Um, yeah, and everything else basically dropped off.
Yeah, I
Pretty
suppose
much.
that's also with Next Design you're dealing with small numbers because I think there was only one Next Design deck at Worlds and
Uh,
there were multiple Next Design decks
yeah,
here.
yeah, interesting. People taking advantage of Next Design's rush at
Yeah.
Euros. Right, what about runner side? What do we have?
So I think reflecting, I think what we've gotten with the new Atom cards and RNG key, a huge jump in Atom participation. Uh, More than 5 times as many atoms at Euros as at Worlds,
Mm.
and of course we see more Anarch dominance as Reina, Valencia going up about 3 times, a little bit more Max, a lot more Reina, which I don't know if that's the result of recent pretty good Netrunner deck of the weeks. Um,
Abram!
what you did. But there was quite a lot of Reinas. Um, I think I put Chaos Theory on the big jumps list, but I think a jump of 1.5 is probably just noise.
Yep.
Uh, on the other hand, I think one of the interesting things with World is kind of an untested thing, and a lot of people trying. And Alice was new, so a lot of people were excited about her, but people were not excited about her. People are not excited about her anymore. I think 7% of Euros versus 100% Worlds.
Yeah. Interesting
Yeah.
observation. Maybe a new card effect there, as you rightly pointed out. Yeah, same thing with Ayla. Ayla, I think it was just released,
Uh,
Mombat-ish.
she was Terminal Directive, so
TD.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, pretty recently.
yeah, fairly close to revised core. So yeah, Ayla,
And
another
I think
one. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think Cavanessa Wu might be eating into her sort of combo shaper room too.
that too.
So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I think Edward Kim also suffered from that whole. I think Anarch decks are a little bit more settled now.
Mm.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, and we
uh,
see the big drop off. Haley Kaplan, the most popular runner at Worlds, now dropping to a third of her former glory.
yeah. I think same with Sunny. I think that's more a thing about Worlds than Euros, where I think people didn't know how to get runner economies working, and so just having underworld contacts giving you credit every once in a while was appealing. Where I think people are less insecure with their credits now.
Yeah, nowadays the meta is too fast for Sunny to be viable. You know, when half the
Oh,
corps are Titan and the other half are Scorp decks trying to Hunter Seek your Nexus, you're not very happy as Sunny. So yeah,
oh, that's an excellent point.
yep,
Yeah, this is a nightmare meta. I actually looking at the meta breakdown where you see all these Titans and
yeah.
all these Scorpios, you'd actually think that being a Lock Haley, you wouldn't hate just having like 3 Satcons and a Clot in your list.
Yes,
Um,
so the theory behind that is apparently Shapers are generally too slow. It's
hmm.
very hard to get Shapers to work when the corp's going so fast. But yeah, seems like some of them actually did it. I think Shapers would. I initially thought Shapers would be the dark horse going into
Hmm.
Euros, and seems like that's the case as they've maintained their percentage between Swiss and the cut, solid 25% as you mentioned. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Right. So that's Euros versus Worlds. Let's move on to identity diversity, which we talked about a bit earlier. This one's focused on the top 16. So among the top 16s for starting with 2 years ago from Worlds 2016, moving on to Euros 2017, then Worlds 17, then Euros this year. We see that actually the diversity has never been the meta has never been more diverse in the competitive side. We had a very bleak period in World 16 where there were only 5 unique runner IDs and bloody hell, only 3 unique corp IDs among 16 players. But now things have changed a lot. Now half of the top cut is sporting different IDs altogether. Same thing for runners. Half of them.
Yeah, Yeah,
Elite
Worlds
IDs.
2016 was a fun Top Cut to watch. I know you were busy at the time, so you weren't able to catch many of the games, but it was
Yeah.
fun ID to watch, but not a or fun cut to watch, but not a fun cut to analyze ID breakdowns afterwards.
No, yeah, everyone was CTM, Sync, Sol. So Worlds 2016 was 100% NBN on the co-op side. So that is about as extreme as spreads go in terms of diversity. And the runner side not much better, 87% Anarch. But these
Yeah,
numbers have,
on the
yeah, go ahead.
on the corp side at Euros last year, not much better. You look
Yeah.
at
So that was the Moon's ETF era. As a result,
yeah,
a lot of the top players were on engineering the future. Most of them playing Moon's base decks. So 80% HB, very strong showing there. 60% Anarch. So brought down a bit, but still more than half of the same faction.
yeah, but it is exciting to see all these different IDs in the cut. Yeah, certainly. Of course, it's not. There's other things in the health of the meta besides uh, ID and faction diversity in the cut, but it is fun to see.
Yeah, so I think the big change came in Worlds 2017 because that's the first big tournament where revised core became the thing. So when that happened, we took away a lot of NBN's teeth, Breaking News, Astroscript, and we also took away HB's 2-3-2 agendas. So no more ABT, no more beta tests. So because of
Right.
that, it brought Jinteki and Wayland back into the picture. So we got that's why you see this big jump from 81% HB to now 37%. It was an even split between HB and Jinteki. Both were
Right.
represented 37.5% of the time. So in the top 16. So yeah, from then on, we see that revised core has done wonders in terms of increasing corp diversity. It made Jinteki and Wayland competitive again.
Yeah. It also feels like there's not one. In terms of what cards are really doing work, it feels like there's not one thing that is making Wayland a popular thing now.
Nope, it's
Um,
not just one thing.
yeah, which is pretty interesting.
Mm. Yeah, if you think about the
All right.
IDs, you have Fast Advanced Titan, you have Lockout Squad, and you have Meat Damage Argus. So three different ways to pull runners apart. So I guess all that combined makes it the dominant corp faction for this current meta. Right.
Yeah, which I think actually nicely tails into the next tab we have, which is
Yes.
Corp subtype breakdown, which is a very important statistic to track, I think. So, what are the things about? Before I think going too deep into it, I should address probably the biggest travesty in Netrunner that Jemison was accidentally printed as a corporation, even though all the other there's a bunch of corps, but there's one corporation, which is
Oh
Jemison. Terrible.
no.
So one of the things you see a lot is that the Wayland Consortium is huge. So whereas a lot of the IDs for say Jinteki are divisions of Jinteki, Tenon is a division, Ag Infusion is a division. Uh, the IDs of Wayland are usually just corps on their own. So yeah, so like Titan is a corp, and yeah, and so it's very important to track this. I think actually you got more corp representation for this year than usual. I didn't track that exactly, but
We'll take your word for that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And but in when you look at the Swiss to cut, you just see the corps whittling away, and I think more specialized divisions are doing better. I think a more hands-on approach to dealing with cybersecurity is just turning out better.
Yeah. Pretty interesting to see the spread here. I never knew that divisions were the most popular IDs to play by far. But interestingly, not a very big variation between when you look at the bar chart, the distribution in Swiss and the cut. It's following the same mountain-esque shape. So pretty similar distributions
Yeah,
among both.
yeah.
Right.
I think the only thing we see is like sort of a drop off in Titans, as we talked about earlier. So yeah.
Right. Right. Why don't you walk us through the runner side of the
So this
subtypes?
is equally important. The three big subtypes of runners. If you're living in New Angeles or anywhere in the year 2XX 7 or 2x plus 5, or I don't know. Anyway, in the future, you can just live your life, or you can get some cool robot arms or robot eyes. Um, or another thing you can do is just have your genes altered. Some people do both. Reina is a Gmod and a cyborg.
Hmm.
Um, and if you do that and then you want to go hacking, sometimes it helps. Here we saw a little bit of a drop off of naturals from the Swiss to the cut, which suggests that maybe those genetic modifications are paying off. Um, yep.
Yeah.
Um, no representation of our clones and viroids, who are, of course, face a lot of adversity.
Yeah,
So
it
it's
seems like cerebral
yeah,
imaging was very strong in the top cut, so apparently they recall all their bioroids, all those defective atoms, and
yeah,
yeah, completely dropped off all those bioroids from Swiss to cut. So
yeah, and I don't know where Ken Tenma went. He's not in the cut, but hopefully he's safe.
the only clone run is Kentama the only clone ID? I think so, right?
For now, though, we will. I think we're definitely getting one in Rain and
Yeah,
Reverie,
I think so too.
and we might get two because, as I understand, it is set in Shiloh, which is sort of a place that runaway clones go to.
Interesting.
Exciting.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
exciting. And for those of you more game-oriented players, these subtypes do matter. Those Gmod, you better be tracking those Gmod bars
Oh
due to
yeah.
the new DJ Fenris coming up. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
You might have to actually care about this. I
yeah,
would have
gotta
loved to
keep track
have,
of those tickers there. Yep.
yeah, I would have loved to. We didn't really have access to deck lists for this. I would have loved to, track CD cards and Ritzy cards and whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
unfortunately,
I
yep.
don't think Ritzy matters at this moment, but CD, there's one card that cares about it.
Yep.
Anyway,
The seedier supplications. Okay, now
uh,
let's move on to packs and boxes. This is a breakdown of the identities based on which pack or box they were in. So, yeah, what can we say? We start with the co-op side.
so
So,
there was a
yep, go ahead.
giant amount of order and chaos representation. All three IDs were there, and all three. Well, besides Gagarin, there were a lot of them.
Right,
Uh,
Titan and, what was that? Titan and,
Argus. I always
of
forget
course,
Argus.
Argus, yes.
I don't never forget Argus, but just I forget it came there. So a quarter of the IDs of the corp IDs were from Order and Chaos. Great box, I guess, to pick up to get your ID for Euros.
Yeah, and I guess this basically showcases the fact that Anarch and Wayland were the dominant factions for Euros this year. So Order and
Yeah,
Chaos being big on both this corp side and the runner side, as we'll see later. Um,
yeah.
yeah, so other interesting stats. So unique IDs is basically the number of identities that were showcased, as in Swiss. Yep. Out of the total number of possible IDs. So, for example, Order and Chaos, all three Wayland IDs were featured in the Swiss, whereas for Honor and Profit, only one of the three IDs was showcased. That being the one lone Kentema, I believe.
Or for Corp Tenant.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
it's called. Yes,
Yeah,
Tenant.
yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, extra shame looking at this chart to Honor and Profit and Data and Destiny. Data and Destiny getting no representation on Corp side.
Yeah, that's the
Uh,
stat that really jumped out at me the most because if you asked me before, I would say I would expect that the IDs from Data and Destiny that would be played are the corp side ones, not the runner side mini factions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, so you are a sync aficionado. I really love sync. How's sync doing right now?
I I don't I don't know why people have dropped off Sync entirely. I guess it's not so much of Sync being bad as Asmari and CTM being too good. Foregoing your Sync identity for 2 credits per turn from Asmari is mostly unjustifiable. I'm guessing that's why, but man, to see it go down that much, it brings a little tear to my eye, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, nothing brings me more joy than having the runner take a turn off and just give away 12 credits.
Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty crazy. On the last column here, we have column B over column E. So that's basically the average representation per ID in the pack. So basically, the frequency accounting for the number of IDs that were released. As you can see, in late. Actually, no. Actually, among the data packs, they have been pretty consistent in terms of the number of identities released. Yeah. So one thing we observe here, interestingly, when we arrange these numbers by chronological order, is that these numbers increase as we go on in time. Lunar cycle and San cycle, not seeing that much chord representation, but as we get down to the Kitara cycle, boy, a lot of people are starting to play the Kitara IDs. Do you think that's due to the new card effect, or because there's some power creep going on here?
I think in this case, I think for Corp, it's probably more of a new card effect because you think about ASA versus say Blue Sun or ASA versus Foundry. I don't
Yeah.
know if one is drastically more strong than the other as much as it's more exciting to play ASA than Foundry, um, unless you're a big Foundry fan like me. Um, it's just fun to get a card every time you roll the dice. But yeah, I think it's a little bit. And I don't know. Do you think there's a big power creep in IDs?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to it's a bit hard to say actually. Maybe if we move on to the runner and then the aggregate total, maybe we can make a conclusion on that. So let's look
Yeah,
at the
that
runner
makes sense.
side. Yeah. So runner side, same thing here. Whoa, look at that pie chart. Order and chaos, man. What's going on here?
It's huge. Yeah, all three Order and Chaos runners, which are of course Max Valencia and Edwardkin, um, showed up, and there's a lot of them. Skipping ahead to your the column B over column E, which is per ID you have how
Yep.
many people showed up. There's per ID in Order and Chaos. There's 36 people showing up with that ID. That's bananas.
Those are insane
Um,
numbers, yeah.
yeah. On the flip side, again, special booing to Honor and Profit, which only managed to get a single ID into this tournament.
Yeah, Honor and
So Honor
Profit
and Profit,
massively underperforming, yeah.
yeah, which I guess is pretty on point with the general consensus for those IDs. I think
Hmm.
not a lot of people are excited about Ian. Not a lot of people are excited about Silhouette. And I think Silhouette, especially with 419, there's even less reason to be her.
Hmm.
Um, and not a lot of people are excited about. Well, I think a lot of people like Ken, the Express Tenma, but not enough always to bring him to a tournament.
Yeah. And if we look at column B to column E again for the data packs in chronological order, we see a similar trend. A lot of Kitara, as usual, but
Yeah,
a lot more inconsistent in that Mumbat and Red Sands were very anomalously low, actually. 0.5 on that column. Seems like the
yeah,
two identities that were printed on those respective cycles were not well received.
yeah. I mean, I think looking at the specific IDs that were in those, Jasminder's the strongest runner ID to come out of Moonbat Cycle,
Yeah,
which is
that says a
not a
lot.
lot. Yeah. I really like both the runners that came out of Moonbat, Nero and Jasminder. It's nice to have, as far as representation goes. It's nice to have. I think I have now three different Indian runners I can pick from, which is great.
Oh, but one of them's
And
rotating soon though. Sad face.
oh, I know. And so many multiracial runners. It's delightful.
It is. It
But
is.
but as far as power level goes, I guess that's also pretty good representation because I don't think of myself as a very good player, and I don't think of Jesminder or Nero as very good IDs.
Well,
And I think similar.
Leela definitely had her time in the sun, so there's that.
Yeah, yeah. And she showed up a little bit.
She did.
A few people were on Leela. And I think similar in Red Sands. I think who do we have? Hmm, he's got Polynesian theme and
Uh,
Los. Yeah,
of course, Los.
yeah. And forgetting who else.
It's a shaper
Oh, Alice,
item.
of course.
Who's that?
Alice.
Ah, Alice, Anna. Yeah,
Yeah,
Alice.
yeah.
Yep.
Cabinessa Wu kept sending her tech to Mars, but she didn't show up until Katara. Uh, yeah, so I guess one interesting thing about this is you kind of wonder like how long does the sort of excitement about a new ID last, and if this is any indication, you would think that maybe it doesn't last an entire cycle. It doesn't
Yeah.
last two cycles,
So
so
yeah,
people aren't still excited about jamming Los. People aren't still excited about finding new Alice decks.
exactly. Yeah, so there's definitely a bit of the new card effect going on, but you can also see the trend in power creeping. As the numbers get higher and higher. So if we look at the aggregate for packs and boxes total, yeah, we see interestingly, we also collated the column B over column E numbers for all big boxes versus data pack IDs, and we see that generally the big box IDs seem to be on a higher power level than data packs, mostly boosted by the order and chaos numbers there. But yeah, that's generally what we are seeing. Kitara cycle helping out the data packs as well by a bit. But yeah, you can see the way the numbers increase as you go down in time. So a bit of the new card effect, a bit of the power creep contributing to this.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see that 33% of all IDs were from Order and Chaos.
Yeah, that's
Or
an insane
yeah,
statistic. 33%, yeah.
or I guess 35.
Yeah, core set, not receiving that much love. We used to keep saying that, core set had some of the most, evergreen cards in the sense that, competitive play always features a lot of core set cards like Hedge Fund, Account Siphon back in the day, Yogg back in the day. All these used to be very staple cards in competitive play throughout history. A bit less of that. Of course, this is not representative because we are only looking at identities, but as far as core set identities go, eh?
Yeah, I was a little surprised not to see somebody trying to door somebody with making news, but
Exactly, yeah.
even with making news, it's not a ID that a lot of if you see a door to door deck at a tournament, they're on making news. It's not like there's a lot of things you do with that ID.
True.
And Stronger Together, I feel like there's two in between Seder and Architects of Tomorrow. There's two stronger Viroid themed IDs, and
Yeah.
what is
The runner side
and
was
yeah,
basically bolstered by PE, Personal Evolution, and a bit of Chaos Theory.
yeah.
Yeah, the other
Um,
identities were basically nearly unplayed.
yeah, and I suppose Gabe sort of has a little bit of his space eaten into by Steve. Not that either of them showed up in droves.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to round off, we'll switch over from talking about identities to talking about the players themselves, specifically those that
Yeah.
made the top cut and improve on their previous Euros performance. Now, this is going to be a quick section. Usually, we can talk a bit more about this, but due to new data privacy laws, the GDPR, and everything, some players choose to remain anonymous, so we won't touch their personal data. And for those of you following along on Cobra.ai as well, that explains why there are so many names that are four characters. Those four-letter abbreviations, those are anonymized names, shall we say? So, of the big ones, the two UK giants, Chris Dyer and Dave Hoyland, once again making the top cut, unsurprisingly. Both very strong performances, Chris Dyer being King of Swiss, improving from his third place finish in Swiss from Euros last year. Dave Hoyland as well, climbing up 2 places from 14th to 12th. Peter Dinya, again, a very consistent player. I forgot which country he's from. Yeah, I would like to say Spain, but I'm not sure. Sorry if I got it wrong. Anyway, Peter, once again making top 16, improving on last year's performance. As with Carlos, I think a name that not many players might be familiar with from Portugal. Our only Blue Sun player. That's him. Making the
Wonderful.
cut this year. Yeah, finishing 13th, up from 18th last year. So for those of you rooting on the Jank, that's your guy.
Yeah, and I think I might be misremembering this, but on the Dead channel, Chris Dyer and Jono's very delightful podcast. I think Peter Dinya was Jono's pick to make the cut, so good on him.
Yep.
So yeah, if anybody from the Dead Channel deserves congratulations for how Swiss went, it's John.
Indeed. Yeah. On your side, could you bring up the corporate.ai standings? Just to
Yeah,
list off the identities for everyone. We know that
absolutely. That sounds
Carlos was on Blue Sun, and Blue Sun and his runner was, I think, I don't remember. Yeah, it slips my mind, but yeah. So Chris Dyer is on Valencia and CTM, the only CTM player in the cut. I expected more CTM representation, but it looks like only Chris Dyer is left flying the flag. I remember Dave Hoyland's on Valencia as well, but on a different NBN. It's Asmari at Tech. What is Peter Dinya on?
Peter is on Titan. I think he's the lone Titan in the
The
cut.
lone Titan. So Fast Advanced Lovers, there's your guy.
Yeah, the best banker, and on Smoke.
Smoke. Yeah. I've heard of some spicy German smokes. I'm not sure if he's German, but I heard there are some really spicy smoke decks going out.
Yeah, there's
around
two
there.
Smokes in the cut, and speaking on behalf of my Delaware friend Dan, Code Marvelous, he is just chomping at the bit to find out what these lists look like because he's a big smoke.
Yeah, I heard
aficionado.
these are absolutely crazy. So there's your guy to root for. And finally, Carlos, what's his runner? We know he's Blue Sun. His runner is 419, I think.
Mr. He's on Armand Walker. Mr.
Harman,
Geist.
of course. Yes, not
Yeah.
419. Guys, the only guys in the cut. So
Yeah, the only shirtless runner, I believe, in the cut.
hey, factoids, there you go. So, yep, that rounds off our stats panels analysis of Euros up to the top cut. Of course, the top cut will play out tomorrow, Sunday, in UK time. But yeah, for now, it's goodbye from me. And any last words from you, Sanjay?
No, this was really fun. Thank you for having me.
And yes, thanks for all the stats. Really appreciate it. For you viewers, in the meantime, as always, happy net running and happy viewing of Euros. And may the best player win.